Hello and welcome to Archaeologists Anonymous, your source for your quick archaeological fix. On today's episode, we're covering the lesser-known sister city of Pompeii called Herculaneum. Let me take you back to Herculaneum. It's a seaside trading town. It's, near Pompeii. It's on a major road from Rome. And in late August of 79 AD, it was covered by a volcanic eruption from Vesuvius, just like Pompeii. Now, Herculaneum wasn't quite as big as Pompeii. We think it had around 4,000 residents, but it had all the features of a major Roman city. And it's just like Pompeii in terms of how well it's preserved. It lets us literally step into the world of a Roman city. In some ways, it's actually better preserved than Pompeii. We'll get into why that is in just a little bit. Also, like Pompeii, it's founded on that same rich, fertile volcanic soil, which put the site precariously next to an active volcano. Not good news. Of course, there's no way that they could have known that, which makes this all the more tragic. One of the things that's helpful for the archaeologists working on this site is actually that it's less well known than Pompeii, so fewer tourists are there, causing less damage to the site. Still, it faces one of the major archaeological ironies, which is the more of a site you uncover, generally the more at danger it is. At Herculaneum, they've had to do a lot of conservation work to shore up some of the buildings, restore some of the frescoes, repair a lot of the damage that happens when you expose an archaeological site to the air. One of the great enemies to archaeology is nature. Another thing that's sort of hindering archaeological work at the site is that there's a modern city built over it. So, we'd like to excavate a lot of this site, but going under houses or potentially having to remove bits of the city to access the site isn't exactly popular with the people who live there. So it seems like for now, a lot of the site is actually going to remain buried. We've only dug up around a fourth to a third of it. Okay, so Pompeii and Herculaneum are both trading cities built on the Mediterranean, on a major road south of Rome, right next to each other, and on volcanic soil that proved to be their downfall in 79 AD. So, what's the difference? Well, when the eruption hit, unlike in Pompeii, the people in Herculaneum could actually see the cloud. They could see the hot ash and smoke and rock spewing out of the volcano, unlike the people at Pompeii who were covered in that cloud and couldn't really see much of anything. In Pompeii, everything turned dark, whereas in Herculaneum, they could see Vesuvius coming for them. And as a result of this, there wasn't as much debris raining down on Herculaneum like with Pompeii, which had, pumice and other different rocks raining out of the sky. Herculaneum was also buried deeper than Pompeii, around 70 to 80 feet below the surface, and you can kind of get an idea for how deep that is in that photo. And when Herculaneum got buried by this pyroclastic flow coming out of the volcano, it extended the coastline. So that's why I keep saying, Pompeii and Herculaneum are coastal cities, because nowadays they're not, because the volcano filled in all that land with what it erupted. That's actually one of the reasons we think that Herculaneum was abandoned. First of all, the town's buried, so there's no foundations on which to rebuild. It's not by the sea anymore, so it's not useful for, coastal trade. And it also has this religious stigma of being cursed by the gods. There was a sense that, if the city was buried in lava, maybe the gods didn't want it to be there. And of course there's the whole, that mountain just erupted, maybe we shouldn't settle there again. Let's, avoid that spot. Okay, so let's go into what was preserved at Herculaneum. What have we found that gives us such a great insight into the day-to-day life of Romans? One of the things archaeologists have found a ton of is frescoes. The Romans really like to paint their walls. Frescoes are very vulnerable. It's one of the things the Herculaneum conservators have to pay extra careful attention to. And frescoes typically don't survive at other sites. But we have a ton of frescoes at Herculaneum, and you could see a few of them over there. One of the frescoes that archaeologists found was actually half finished. that the painters didn't have time to complete because of the eruption. And there's actually some spilled lime on the wall, which shows that when the painters got out of there, they kicked over a paint can by accident, basically. I mean, imagine if you're that painter, you're going about your day, you're painting this wall. There have been a few tremors over the past few days, but you couldn't have expected this. And all of a sudden, the world is exploding, so you kick the paint can on the way of getting out of there. It's, a remarkably human moment. I feel like we often mythologize Rome, this era of perfect marble and, well laid out streets and all this, but I think that another thing we need to focus on is these human moments. Rome was made up a bunch of people just trying to live their life, and these frescoes are a great example of that. Another thing that's really well preserved is statues with paint on them. One of the things that we've been getting really good at in the past few decades is techniques to reveal the paint pigments on sculptures without damaging them. That's one thing that a lot of people don't know about classical sculpture. It was all painted. So here you can see a nice sculpture where you can see that they painted in the eyelashes, the hair, and at Herculaneum you can still visibly see the colors where they were, which is not that common for most Roman sites. I mean, this is just crazy detailed. Isn't that amazing? Another thing that differentiates Herculaneum from Pompeii is that a lot of organic materials were preserved because of the different ways that the eruption hit. With Pompeii, it was this, cloud of ash and everything, but with Herculaneum still had the sort of fast-moving lava flow that Pompeii had, but it didn't have that rain of ash, which burned and destroyed a lot of the organic materials at Pompeii. And that really helped archaeologists. The organic materials are incredibly important for us. Let me show you some examples. You can find food, clothing, wooden structures like this, little mini temple, which would have held offerings to household gods. You get these wooden bits of architecture. Now, most of the wood survives as carbonized wood. It's been burned, it's been turned into carbon, but it's still preserved in the shape that it was in. And we also have some wood that wasn't carbonized, that's still just as it was back then. That's pretty awesome. I think the coolest thing is that we have some bread that survives. That's an original ancient Roman bread loaf with the name of someone stamped into it. The Romans had these sort of communal bread ovens, so to know which bread was yours, you'd stamp your name on it before putting it in the oven. So we think that that's what that is. I just love the idea that it's sort of like an ancient version of writing your name on your food before you put it into the office fridge. Another really cool thing that we gotta look into is the water system at Herculaneum. The Romans were famous for their water systems, and I think it is a deserved reputation. Many Roman aqueducts were actually underground, and they had these pipes that would line through the city to deliver water to the different baths, houses, water fountains, that sort of thing. Herculaneum had 3 different pipes. One would go to the baths, one would go to the rich people's houses, and the other would go to the common water fountains. So it's sort of interesting that you can see the social classes in the water supply. And it's also sort of very Roman that it's sandwiched by public water sources. You've got the baths, the rich people, and then the water fountains. So you've got public baths, private houses, public water for everyone else. Very interesting and very Roman. Okay, so Herculaneum, less known than Pompeii, right? But it was unfortunately known to a local Italian noble family. And I say unfortunate because they kind of caused some damage to the site and put their workers in kind of terrible conditions. Nowadays, we basically call what they did looting. They sort of sent people to tunnel into the remains since they didn't really have the resources to dig the entire site up. They'd dig these tunnels and send people in there to try and collect different ancient objects to store in the family house. This is really horrifying to archaeologists. And not to mention, being in one of these tunnels seems terrible. It's these sort of awful cramped conditions. There's no electricity, so you're using, lanterns in these tiny little trenches that go into the hillside for hundreds of feet. So if modern excavations were like this, I'd say count me out. Luckily, modern excavations are so much better and so much more ethical in terms of less looting and also treating their workers with some amount of ethics. Miss me with the claustrophobia. Okay, so we've gone over how Pompeii and Herculaneum are different. You know, at Pompeii, they're sort of covered immediately in this cloud and this fast-moving lava, and, you know, at Herculaneum, they have more time to see the cloud, but the town's still buried in that moving lava. So, for a while, we also thought that there weren't any bodies at Herculaneum. At Pompeii, we've got these really disturbing plaster casts of how people were preserved in the ash that fell down on Pompeii. You know, no ash at Herculaneum. Well, tragically, we did find evidence that a lot of people did die at Herculaneum. So, down by what would have been the seashore then, around 300 skeletons were found huddled together. I'm just gonna throw a content warning. There's gonna be skeletons. You know, being buried by a volcano is pretty disturbing. Now, there are several theories as to why these people were there. Was it an effort to evacuate the town? Did they think that it was the most structurally safe place to shelter from the volcano since they're sort of back under those arches there? Archaeologists have done some calculations, and it seems like they really only had 10 minutes to find a safe place, so that might have just been the best that those 300 people could have done. So archaeologists who specialize in studying remains like this were able to find out that they were basically boiled alive at 400 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can see how their bodies actually contorted in response to this extreme heat. This is what archaeologists call thermal-induced contraction. We also think that a very hot gas, hit them because of the eruption, and it caused their skin to evaporate. Yikes. All of this together, boiled these people's brains and caused their heads to explode in some instances. So, being killed by a volcanic eruption is pretty grotesque. Luckily for those people, we think that they didn't feel any of this because they died instantly. So, that is the amazing and horrifying story of Herculaneum, the lesser-known sister city to Pompeii. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to watch another video, like and subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next one. This has been Sean Silvia of Archaeologists Anonymous.
It's the end of the world as we know it, 'cause Vesuvius had to blow it. Got a whole Roman town left to show it. It looks fine, carbonized.